Hello, it's Randall Schwartz back again, illustrating some other thing that I answered on Stack Overflow that I thought led to a nice demonstration of some features that you may or may not know exist in Dart. This is pretty clever, actually. So, the original task was to take two lists and add them together to make a third list, element by element. So the first elements were added together, the second elements were added together, and so on. Real simple task, should be easy. A lot of people would reach for a index loop where they would go over and pull the parallel elements out of there. There's an easier way to do this. Well, you might not think so after reading all my code, but let's just get into this here and see how I did it. So here's main. This code will paste directly into Dartpad. There's nothing fancy that it pulls in, so you don't have to worry about sandboxing and stuff. So I'm generating 3 lists just to prove it's not just for 2 lists. And I'm doing this with my favorite little list generate function again. Here's 10 items that are the numbers from 0 to 9 because generate provides 0 to the n minus 1, I guess it would be. For 15, the next list, B, I should say, the next list, I take the number and multiply it by 100. And the nice thing about that is that when we look at the output, we can actually see the two different numbers being mixed together in an addition. 20 numbers that are going to be multiplied by 10,000. So that's going to be 0, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, and so on. And then I'm going to look for the output of this function sumIt. How clever, sumIt. Since we don't have args, have to do it by passing a list of those args. So there's a list of those. And then we get down into sumIt. It's actually going to return an iterable. Now, an iterable is going to be just fine being passed back to the print function because the print function will iterate it and dump that out as a single value. So we don't need to worry about the return value there. We don't need to convert it to a list because print's going to go ahead and run it anyway. Okay, so it's an iterable. We're calling it sumIt. It's going to take a list of nums. So we're going to throw that into the formal variable here, lists. And then the next thing, some of you might not have seen this yet, sync star. What does that mean? It means I am going to return an iterable. And I'm going to do this by calling in the middle of my subroutine the yield statement. We'll see how that gets worked in a moment. But the first step inside is to take the list that just came in and map them through this expression. E becomes e.iterator. That's going to return an iterator for each of those lists. Now we need an iterator because we need to step through each list in parallel. So one of the things an iterator knows how to do is move next, and that will tell us what the next item is in each of the things. And then we got to do a to-list here, and I did this for a while without that, and it breaks everything. So I finally understood I had to do to-list. So now we know its is a list of iterators of nums. That's good, because that's going to be able to walk through these 3 lists being created at the top and give us individual pointers into each of the things. We've now got the infamous while true loop. Of course, you never have one of those without having a break somewhere, or you're going to be running for quite a long time. Probably an infinite amount of time. One of those more of those infinite things that I always talk about. Then I'm going to set a flag so I can get out of this loop. We're going to call it done, and we're going to set it to true initially. And you'll see why in a moment if you haven't already peeked ahead. We're also going to create the sum, and that actually should be 0.0 if you're being really strict about things. So we'll go ahead and change that because we want nums. We don't want them to be ints in sum. That actually breaks things. So we're going to have doubles in sum. Okay, so I could declare this as double, but now it's definitely a double sum. Okay, so we've got our two outer variables set. Now let's go ahead and start the iteration. In this line, I'm just walking it, which stands for iterator, but it also is nice because it. It's one of the things I'm working on, it. In its. So that's going to basically go through for every one of the lists I have. I'm going to look at the iterator that I've created a few lines earlier on that list. And then I'm going to call it move next. What that does is it takes an iterator, it tries to go to the next item. Now initially it's going to go from nowhere to the first item. If that returns true, we were able to advance to the next item. Eventually it's going to return false at the very end of the list. We'll see how that works in a moment. But if we were able to advance on this particular iteration or iterator, then we set done to false because we're not done yet. We've still got values we want to be adding together. And we also take sum and we add in it.current. Now that's a getter. It's not a it's not a it's hard to tell what it is but it's not something you have to put parens after, unlike move next and stuff. That's slightly confusing sometimes. I always have to look to figure it out, or I let the IDE tell me I did it wrong, because it would end up, like if I left it off the parens off move next, it would actually go with it would tell me I'm doing an if on a closure, which is not going to work very well at all. Okay, so it.current. So now we're adding up our sum, and this is on the first item of each list. It's going to be what's in sum at the moment. Now, if I didn't set done to false here, then we see, I gotta get it right here. If I set done to false, this is not going to break. So that means we do have more items and we don't want to break. We are not done yet. And now here's the clever part coming up next. So sum is the sum of the first item of each list. And we've also moved the pointer forward in each of those lists via the iterator. Yield is telling Dart, go ahead and return this value as the first element of this iterable. But it keeps its place. It doesn't actually leave this subroutine yet. It simply returns the value and actually is set up in such a way that it will come back to that exact same spot. So what happens, this is all because of sync star, we're going to get a list of values. The first row is 0, 0, 0, so the sum is going to be 0 as well. Second row is, let's see, it's going to be 1, 100, 10,000. So it's going to be 10101. Okay? Well, actually, you can cheat and look down there and see that this is actually what it's generating. Okay. Now, what happens when we get to the end of one of the lists? Well, at that point, as we're doing our parallel iteration, walking all the way through, it.moveNext is going to return false, and we'll end up skipping this entire body of code. So done doesn't get reset. Okay, remember done is true at the beginning, so if we don't change done at all, done is going to be true, and done is going to cause us to break. So as the three lists eventually drop out and drop out and drop out, finally we get to a point where we have nothing left to process, and we don't even execute yield sum, because sum would still be 0, which is kind of silly. You don't want a 0 value at the end. So I think that's all the code. Let's go ahead and run it. There we go. And as you can see, 0.0, 10, 10, 0, 20, 20, 20, 0, 30, 30, 30, 0, 40, 40, 40, 0. There's probably some way I could have done this where I capture the type of the lists that are coming in, but this is close enough. This will work for now. Yeah, so That's just a quick way to work in parallel through multiple lists without having to do it by indexing into everything and so on. So often we can get into off by one errors if we use indexes, indexes, one of those words. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. You know what to do. Click on all the things, push all the things, vote up all the things, and I'll be back again next time.